have you. This my this part of the personal branding series interviews which I'm doing with thought leaders, and you've been a person who has reinvented yourself. You started your career in HR. You've done a lot of work in the learning space. You authored books, Digital Tsunami, and now you there's so much you do in your personal capacity. So really excited to have you on this series. So, what I want you to do is for the benefit of viewers, if you could just kindly introduce yourself, a quick, short introduction.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you so much, Anisu, for having me. Uh, I started my life as a HR person, worked in different kinds of companies. Um, Thought that, learning and development is where my heart lay because I kind of sampled the range of things in HR and then decided that that's what I enjoyed the most. And I was lucky to get a large platform like Wipro, where I joined as the chief learning officer after a stint with Microsoft, Pepsi, Colgate, etc.
Right.
And subsequent to that, when I wrote my last book, which was the Digital Tsunami, that was an outcome of really looking at how the world was changing because of digital technology and many other forces that were coming together. And I
Right.
kind of saw it much like a tsunami that before the thing happens, it sort of recedes and then just bounces back and destroys a lot of things. So I kind
Hmm.
of saw that and I wrote about it. And now, so that was also the time when I decided to become a freelancer and
Hmm.
started working with a set of other gig workers, and sort of we work with different kinds of companies, three
Right.
areas: leadership, talent, and culture. And
Okay.
now I'm working on my next book, which is called Dreamers and Unicorns. So that's the
Oh,
full story.
great. Fantastic. So, what I'm going to do is I'll make notes while we speak, but broadly we'll just have a conversation on the questions which I have. So, firstly, I know. I mean, you are modest and you will not admit that you're a personal brand, but a lot of people follow you. So, what, according to you, what's your definition of personal branding?
Personal brand is something that adds value to other people, in some shape or form, and because of which there is a emotional connection which is built. So a brand, in my view, is not so much of a logical thing, because if you are really a strong brand, then people root for you, they help you, and it's an emotional connection. It's not a transactional connection. So I think brands operate at two levels. One, there is a transactional thing. So I could sort of request you to be a brand ambassador for product X or service X. But then when the relationship transcends the transaction and you sort of, the engagement is regardless of the transaction, then that to me is the real personal brand.
Okay, great. And when in your reflecting on your life, so how did you begin to know that you are a personal brand in some sense or the other? So, what are those signs which told you that yes, people do see value in what I'm doing, and so what are those signs which indicated?
That's a when you're a consultant, when you're a freelancer, I mean, the obvious response is, if your business goes by word of mouth, I think that's a good indicator. So
Yeah.
as a freelancer, that's really what I look for. That how much of it is repeat and how much of it really comes through word of mouth. So that, I think, is a good indicator.
Got it.
Um, and I also think that it's a level of engagement that people have with the stuff that you contribute and post and all that. And I think when they ask for
Mm,
when they ask for something that you may or may not have, so let's imagine that I post something every week, and
mm,
one week I don't post something, and then people say, hey, what happened? I mean, I was waiting for it. I mean, that's
mm,
a good indication that and it has to be somebody who has nothing to gain or lose
mm.
because of your content. So
Okay.
when there is no transactional value, that's what I say is the real acid test of a brand.
Okay. Fantastic. And so, if you were to reflect on your journey, so what did you do? I mean, was it? And again, I'm not saying it's a conscious effort, unconscious effort, but there would have been some things which you did to build your personal brand, or to some of the aspects and elements of it. So, what would those be?
I mean, Anish, I mean, I really don't know how to answer that, because there wasn't really a strategy. I'm not I don't understand brands or anything in that sense of a marketing person or something that I can say, okay, it was this framework.
mm,
I just did what I really enjoy, which is I enjoy writing, I enjoy drawing, and I've been using them in my work, even when I was when I would sort of either teach
mm,
the 5 years that I taught at XLRI.
mm,
That was also the
mm,
time when I used to draw on my slides, and I sort of combined that. Then
mm,
at some point of time I started blogging, because Gautam Ghosh, who
mm,
introduced me to this whole world of blogging and social media, really I owe this
mm,
entire thing to him.
mm,
And so he said that, why don't you? This was the time when my first work of fiction, Mediocre but Arrogant, that was being
mm,
launched, and so I was working in US at that point of time. And Gautam
mm,
actually said that, why don't you start a blog? And I didn't know what that meant. So what I did
mm,
was I took the entire manuscript and loaded it on my web, that blog spot. And my
mm,
publisher jumped up and said, "What's wrong with you? What have you done?" And
mm,
so they, "Please delete it, or I'll sue you." So I just immediately brought it down.
mm,
Um, so that's so from that, then eventually, as you, like anything else, as you
mm,
put more content in social
mm,
media, you learn. The more content you create, the more you learn about the nuances. So
mm,
I created content on the blog every week. I wrote about something or
mm,
the other.
mm,
Then I kind of started to illustrate it, because just text was looking boring. Then I
mm,
started to use photographs. Then I use a few voice clips. From the voice clips, I made the podcast. Um,
mm,
the sketch. So I moved from illustrations to sketch notes. So
mm,
everything, it's really evolved over a span of time. And then I tried
mm,
different platforms. Whether it
mm,
was the blogs or Twitter, or more recently Instagram, where I'm a complete novice, or
mm,
Facebook,
mm,
which I used, and kind of so you juggle different formats, and you juggle different kinds of subjects, all of which, from my point of view, it enables me to become a better writer. The feedback from people tells me what I'm doing right or wrong in the
mm,
illustrations. So that,
mm,
I think, you don't do anything to shape a brand. Actually, I think it is the people who you're writing for or drawing for. They shape what you should be doing and or not doing. So
mm.
really, I think a brand is shaped by the people who are engaged with the brand. So
Got
it's
it.
really not. It does matter. I mean, tomorrow, if I wrote about sports, about which I have absolutely zero credibility, uh,
Mm, mm,
obviously people would say, "Why are you doing this? That's completely
mm,
silly thing to do."
mm,
So they would shape the brand, and they would not
mm,
consume that content. No
mm,
matter how much they would have appreciated something else that I would have done.
mm,
So I think people shape it. It's
mm.
really not you.
Okay, so I mean, what I heard you say was that you tried a lot of things while and which helped you evolve, and along the way, it did sound like a bit of trial and error, but then also there was some method to the madness because you stuck to your core areas of expertise because you didn't deviate from that. You tried new platforms which were of relevance to the audiences, and therefore they could resonate. So I mean, I could, at least from what you said, I can sense that there was some process to this entire journey.
Well,
Am I
I
right?
mean, so actually, I was going to say that you summed it up far more crisply than the blabbering and meandering that I did. It was so well structured. I wish I had spoken as smartly as you did. But yes, thank you. That's I think those key ideas.
So, if Abhijit, if I had to ask you, like, what are some of the attributes people, associate with your personal brand? So, if people were to tell you in a few words what you are as a person, as a personal brand, what would those be?
I have absolutely no idea. I kind of, I think that they would sort of look at me as somebody who tries many different things. I mean, if I were to just really, cut across the different formats,
Hmm.
just I've tried. I wrote fiction, then I wrote nonfiction. People said nobody ever writes a sequel to in a work of fiction.
Hmm.
I took that chance and wrote it, and that did reasonably well. And then, so even in nonfiction, in some sense, uh,
Hmm.
the book that I'm doing now, Dreamers and Unicorns, is really like a sequel to the Digital Tsunami because it really expands on the concept a lot more and talks about frameworks and all that.
Mm,
I sort of have tried to learn about Instagram, which I don't understand. I'm trying to
mm,
learn video. I'm trying to learn, you know, I'm taking a course to do all of that. So
mm,
I'm not afraid to try out something and make an ass of myself. So I think that helps me to try many different things. Of course, there are so many things that don't work out, but
mm,
you know, I think I still come back and try something different tomorrow if it came up.
mm. Okay, got it. And if I were to ask you what, according to in your journey, in your observations, your learning, so who are some of the other, maybe a couple of names of personal brands you kind of, you know, have learned from? And again, it need not be celebrities; it could be people from everyday walk of life kind of a thing. So who are those couple of people you can call out?
You know, I think it's just way too many because you learn different things from different people. It's a bit like when you create a character in fiction.
Mm,
Most of the times
mm,
it may have been triggered by one individual, but effectively a character is interesting
mm,
when it has, it's a composite of many different things. So something about the way the person talks may be interesting for
mm,
somebody, but you bring that in, or something the way the person thinks, or the person demonstrates an extraordinary act of courage.
mm,
That's something that inspires you. So you know then you understand humility from somebody. So I think human beings really work on many, many different elements. Then there are the usual deep impact points, so you learn the most initially in the first couple of years. I think, learn a lot from your parents, your teachers. In my case, my grandparents encouraged my writing a lot. I
mm,
read a lot of, initially, a lot of Bengali literature, so I
mhm,
was deeply influenced by all the classic writers,
mm,
especially Satyajit Ray,
mm,
his entire series. Just I was very fascinated by the fact that he could write, draw, make
mm,
movies, compose music. I was very fascinated by
mm,
that. In terms of literature, I just love the style of somebody like Sunil Gangopadhyay,
mm,
so who wrote poetry as effortlessly as he wrote prose. So I
mm,
think if I were to sort of look at what inspires me about a person is
mm,
that the person is very multidimensional,
mm,
because each time you shift, it
mm,
requires you to activate a different part of your brain, and I think
mm,
that is really hard, and that's what I find extraordinarily inspiring about people who can reinvent themselves, try different things. So I think
mm.
that's what I would say is the common piece. So
Got it.
in the
Oh,
contemporary world, I mean, there are people who've done similar things, so I'm very inspired by them.
great. Yeah. So I mean, I heard names like, of course, your parents, grandparents, teachers, such as Ray. So again, yeah. So and again, you articulated what I really like the fact that you mentioned about the multidimensionality part of it. So that's really great. If I were to, again ask you, were there specific steps a personal brand should take when they go about building a name for themselves or carving a niche for themselves? Are there any two or three very critical steps they need to take?
Well, you know, I I think when you look at a brand, I mean, the first thing is to be able to build trust.
Mm,
Whoever the brand is aiming to connect with.
mm,
I think the first really major piece is how do you build trust.
mm,
The second thing is really around being consistent with the values, the two or three values that
mm,
you care about.
mm,
It's so I think because of this, I would talk about the third element, which is
mm,
um, your brand has to be very authentically you.
mm.
Because if you can't do that, I think it's very hard for people to sustain something that is not inherently
Got
their
it.
core self. So
Mm,
if you can't do that, I mean, it is very, very difficult to sustain that engagement. So
mm.
I would think about that.
Brilliant. So what I heard was building trust, staying consistent with your values and being you as an authentically you. So brilliant. Yeah. So yeah, in your journey,
Anish, I have to take classes, and how do you summarize things so beautifully? After this call gets over, you'll please
oh,
coach me on how to
you're
do
being you're being very modest. So if I would ask you about your the challenges that you faced while you went about it. So everyone would have initially found it difficult to break through or gain trust, like you mentioned. So what are some of the challenges you faced when maybe when you reinvented yourself from a professional and being an entrepreneur?
that. I talked about the fact that I have always been very fascinated by, people who have different dimensions to themselves, because as you move from one particular field to another, it actually needs reinvention. And by that, the term is used a lot. I mean, it's used very loosely by many of us. But, reinvention essentially means um, walking away from things that you are really good at, and then you sort of really start to be a novice. So I think the first part that happens is to be able to not bring in your previous mindset that, okay, when uh, so in case of someone like Ray, I mean, I think if he said, okay, this is how I can write, let me do exactly the same thing when I compose music, I think it wouldn't have worked. So
Mm,
being able to, learn the grammar of every field, I think
mm,
is probably the first one. The
mm,
second piece that I would think about is uh, being able to sort of build a certain level of expertise before you put that, you kind of bring in your own style, which means there is
mm,
a stage when you enter a particular field where
mm,
you really start to learn from others. And
mm,
once you've learned the thing, once you understand the rules of the game, then you
mm,
can go and reinvent the rules. So if you look
mm,
at any of these major artists,
mm,
many of them actually started off. I mean, whether it's a Salvador Dali, whose work I really enjoy, or someone like
mm,
Picasso, many of the other contemporary artists as well. So
mm,
I think what you discover about them is that they learned the rules, they've
mm,
understood the grammar of that, and then you can sort of really make your own rules, and they can decide to break something or create something different,
mm,
because you must understand the frameworks that you're
mm.
going to play with.
Very interesting, very interesting. Uh, and again, if I would ask you, what were some of the things that you gained along the way and you lost along the way? Because of course, each time you go about your journey, there are time, your personal family pursuits, family responsibilities. There are a lot of things which you may have to give up. So, what are some of the things that you gained along the way? What are some of the things that you lost along the way?
I think, you know, uh, being able to learn something, whether it works out or not, I mean, in my view, that's again by itself. So, I wouldn't start to do something because, I intend to gain something out of it. But just that experience of learning something is very fulfilling for me. So I
Mm,
really sort of, want to do that. So, for example, if I want to learn about photography, which I occasionally, dabble in,
mm,
and I'm complete zero at that. So, but then,
mm,
I'm going to try and learn something from all the experts that I know. And,
mm,
every little thing that they say improves my work a little bit. I'm never probably going to be, anywhere in that zone of being a great
mm,
photographer. But I just
mm,
enjoy improving myself just a little bit. I think that for me is a very big element of what I gain, just being a little better version of myself.
mm,
I also think that, it's the same thing happens in every relationship,
mm,
you know, that you become, every relationship also makes you a little better version of yourself. So
mm,
I think all learning is essentially about discovering your own identity in some shape or form.
mm,
And in that whole process, you also contribute to the identity of many of the other people that you're either learning from or working with, and all of that.
mm,
So while, yeah, in one of your previous questions, I did mention, the people that who inspired me. But I kind of think I started by saying that it's just way too many, because I've learned from each of my managers,
mm,
good and bad. Each one has taught me what to do and what not to do. Sometimes consciously, sometimes not so consciously.
mm,
I've learned from my colleagues, my teammates, people I have coached. They've asked a question which has,
mm,
completely challenged the foundation of what I thought or believed in. And it may have been an innocent question, not intended to be something so deep, but it's triggered. So I've learned human beings are a byproduct of their experiences and their relationships.
mm,
So things that you do teach you, the relationships that you nurture also teach you.
mm.
It's a two-way street in every sense of the term.
Got it. So you're so what I hear you say that everything that you have done has given you some learning, some takeaway. But is there some, I mean, there's nothing which you feel that you have, had to give up or had to let go or,
Yeah,
to.
yeah, of course. When you pursue many different things, I don't think you become really outstanding at anything. You become, maybe possibly good at a couple of different things. That
Mm,
is a choice. Breadth
mm,
versus depth is always a choice. So I think that's a, you know, I'm more fascinated by trying out many different things than just, So I admire people who are able to sort of just stay focused.
mm,
The
mm,
way I kind of try to build a little bit of that is, when, for example, most creative things do
mm,
require a combination of breadth and depth. I'll give you
mm,
an
mm,
example. So when you're
mm,
thinking of a book, you're creating the structure and all of that, and you would
mm.
know it just as well. I mean,
Right.
there's an initial phase which is fun, which is divergent. You meet a
Mm,
bunch of different people, learn many different things,
mm,
and then there comes a point of time when you have to make choices. I'm going to add this or not do this, and they kind
mm,
of converge. So in the space of divergence, you embrace a lot of things. In the
mm,
space of convergence, you give up many things. uh,
mm,
you meet many people, but you build depth of relationships with only a few. So I
mm,
think the ones that you are not able to build depth of relationships are the ones you are
mm,
giving up
mm,
in some shape or form. I mean, there are hundreds of the friends
mm,
you've had in college, but you are not in touch with every one of them. So you
mm,
are giving up relationships on a
mm,
sustained basis, and you sort of, it's a process of convergence at one
mm.
level and divergence at another level, both of which go on in parallel. So
Fantastic. Yeah, and that's a great way of summarizing it. In terms of your, if you were to give one, piece of advice for someone who's starting out, trying to build a personal brand for themselves, what is that one piece of advice you would give him or
uh, I'm this is like a novice giving advice to somebody without having any clue about what they're talking about. Um, but I think if you really want to build a person, it's a bit like your career choices or everything. It's based on what really works for you. So
her?
personal brand is inherently, I think the key element is personal, which means it has to be what you are and that unique combination of your strengths and weaknesses. So like
Mm,
I said, that sometimes I'm very easily distracted. My threshold level of boredom is supremely low. But
mm,
in some sense, that has also enabled me to try out many different things.
mm,
But the downside of that is that I'm not able to build that kind of depth which I would sort of think of doing when I start something. So I think
mm,
that this is it. I'm going to really build my depth in this. Uh,
mm,
so but at the end of the day,
mm,
that is the unique thing about you. And if you're comfortable, so you have to be first comfortable with what you mean to yourself, because
mm,
that's the essence of the personal brand.
mm,
Then you articulate it in multiple ways or formats.
mm,
The format is irrelevant.
mm,
I mean, it could be many different things. In your work, you're a brand. I mean, in your writing, you're a brand. In your friendship, you're a brand. In your dreams, you're a brand. Kind of
mm,
things that matter to you.
mm,
Why do you contribute to one particular charity versus not the rest?
mm,
So it's
mm,
because, in some things I'm a lot more focused and some things
mm,
I'm not. So, but then that is really essentially you.
mm. Interesting. So what you're saying is that if you focus on who you want to be at the start, I mean, the chances are that you would then at least progress in the right direction and not get deviated from the different things which are thrown at you.
Sure.
Um, yeah, and if in your journey when you looked at it, so if there's something, one aspect which you want to change, and when you reflect back on your life and your career and your journey, Is there something that you would like to go back and change so that you do things differently? What would that be?
I think, no, I mean, life has its own, we are a combination not just of the things that have worked out well.
Mm,
When you think of changing, you inevitably think of changing things that have not worked out. Yeah,
mm, mm,
you want to sort of do that.
mm,
But maybe I would like to change the combination of some of the things that have worked out as well, in
mm,
order to see whether I would be a different person, and I probably would. Uh,
mm.
Having thought about it in that fashion, I mean, I don't think I want to change anything because life offers a continuously evolving paradigm. So no, I'm just very happy with living in the moment and sort of pursuing that. So
Okay.
no, I wouldn't want to. Yeah, I mean, I can think about what I would want to change about the future,
Mm,
in terms of things that I. Yeah, I mean, I would probably, uh, looking at how the future evolves in multiple ways. I'd like to just completely stay adaptable,
mm,
and do what it takes to be adaptable. Uh,
mm.
but if you really were to pin me down and say what is the one thing you would change, I think I would. I started focusing on fitness and health very late in my life. I think I would start doing that much earlier.
Okay. Great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that also applies to me. And so, if there was one line of one kind of recipe which you would say for personal branding success, like a mantra, what would that be? I know you mentioned be yourself, be authentic, but is there anything else which you like to call out?
I would. I don't know. One of the things that, as a philosophy, I always fall back on in my head, which is, "This too shall pass."
Mm,
Uh, so I think whether in branding or in life or anything,
mm,
you evolve. So
mm,
the moment, in a particular time when something seems absolutely miserable, uh,
mm,
you know, it will pass, as will the good things.
mm,
So, in some sense, keeping that just keeps you really sane. You don't get, I therefore,
mm,
yes, when I'm working on something, I'm extremely focused on giving my best.
mm,
Once it is done, you kind of, every time I've published a blog post, I
mm,
I give my best, but then as soon as I've done it, I kind of think, oh my god, I mean, this is like, there are 100 things I think I should have improved, and
mm,
then you kind of work on something else and you move forward. So this ability to not be either enamored by the stuff that you create. I mean, so when
mm,
people say, which is your most favorite
mm,
work that you've done? I have
mm,
no favorites. I mean, it mattered a lot to me when I wrote that,
mm,
but subsequent to that, I kind of, I'm fairly detached from it, and therefore, yeah, I mean, I would
mm,
like something that I've worked on to do well, but if it doesn't, then it disappoints me for a brief point of time, and then I move on because it just simply means I need to do something else. That thing
mm.
has lived its life, and
Okay.
when I did it, I didn't do it with the idea of it being X, Y, or Z.
Mm,
So
mm,
suddenly, as an afterthought, I mean, I should now also put a standard and say, I think now it should have been this.
mm, mm,
That I think is really, it prevents you from improving
mm,
on what you've worked on.
mm,
So I don't get emotionally attached to what I have created. For the moment when I'm doing it, yes, deeply attached.
mm.
Right now,
Okay.
the book I'm working on, I'm deeply involved in it. I care about it. I think it's the most important thing I've ever done. I want to give it
Mm,
my best, all of that.
mm,
I think the day it sort of gets published,
mm,
I will be completely detached from it. And yeah, so when I was doing the podcast, I was tracking
mm,
it. I cared about it. And then at some point of time, with each passing episode, you say, okay, what can I do better? What can I do better? What can I do better?
mm,
So I wouldn't get
mm.
in, you know, I wouldn't
Okay.
get attached to anything. Yeah.
Got it. So basically, you're saying, stay grounded and stay detached, I would say, right? That's how you would probably put it.
If you stay detached, you will stay grounded because really, I mean, it also, it also builds your resilience because, in life, I mean, at least in my particular case, the ratio of failures to success, if you think about it, it's really loaded. I have way more failures than success. But I think what keeps me saying is just I shrug even at that and say, okay, it didn't work out, and then just you know
Want
so
to
in
the
that
next.
sense, being a little clinical about that just helps me not to break down, and it builds my resilience to just bounce back. Even after you sort of get knocked in the face, you bounce back.
Mm. Interesting. So Abhijit, now with all the COVID-19 and pandemic and crises hitting us now, in this kind of scenario, what can personal brands do? So do they pause everything, or do they continue doing what they do? So what is your advice for personal brands in this kind of a situation?
Um, I would kind of say that, look, this is a time which is difficult for everyone. And I think if you have some kind of a way of being of value to someone,
Mm,
whatever shape or form,
mm,
that's what you see the personal brands really doing. There are people who are taking their courses and putting it online and sort of saying, I've written this,
mm,
read it, it's free. I've removed the paywall.
mm,
People are putting their concerts online,
mm,
so
mm,
that's something
mm,
which are ticketed at very high prices. It's
mm,
available for free now.
mm,
Um, and I think it's really like holding, joining hands with the rest of humanity to kind of say, okay, let's go through it together. I think eventually, right now, one should be just looking at what is it that I can do, something
mm,
that I'm capable of contributing in this.
mm,
There are billionaires who are contributing money. There's somebody who's
mm,
contributing time. There's somebody who's
mm,
contributing ideas. There's some people who are
mm,
working on the vaccine. So I think everybody is doing uh,
mm,
something, whether they are personal brand or not. In this
mm,
process, I think the brands will get defined.
mm,
So there are also the times when people are using this time to price gouge. Sort of
mm,
say that, okay, this is the time I can make the most of the
mm,
opportunity. It's a short window of opportunity.
mm,
So your true self comes through in the crisis. So I think it's
mm,
that.
mm.
So if one can contribute anything,
Got
your
it.
ideas, your wealth, your whatever,
Mm,
space, anything,
mm.
I would do
Interesting.
that.
One last question, Abhijit. In terms of millennials, Gen Y, Gen Z, what's your advice for them about personal branding?
Um, I think because of the fact that many of the people who've been born in the who've grown up with smartphones and the internet and all, I think understand the grammar of the technology a lot easily,
Mm,
uh, and I think somewhere that is one half of
mm,
the whole process of connecting with people. There's the second side, which is about really understanding very deeply uh, what is perennial, what is not transient. So I think there is a temptation. We have to understand that every post or every something, no matter what, how viral something goes, it's
mm,
sort of, if it is not something concrete which appeals to a very core part of human beings, it's transient. It'll sort of disappear. I mean,
mm,
Kolaveri D as a song was like bizarrely popular. It was the song of the year, and CNN wrote about it.
mm,
Who talks about it today? So,
mm,
I think you have to understand this. Each post,
mm,
is like that little bubble. It sometimes surfaces and sometimes it doesn't. So it will be really. But if you understand deeper human needs,
mm,
whichever way, and it can be that some people understand it better online. Some people
mm,
understand it by conversing with people. I kind of understand all of that in my engagement one on one with people. Then you sort of really build, sharpen that understanding. I think
mm,
that's really a lifetime journey. So what you do, how you change yourself by trying to understand other people.
mm,
So the shift is really about how you can adapt yourself as you understand more of the world. I think that's really the piece for everybody, and it's independent of generations or millennials or Gen Z or anything. People older than me or any. anyone else. This applies to everyone, that you adapt yourself. Some people find it more challenging to adapt to technology. So those who have sort of grown up in the pre-tech era find that a challenge. Those people who grown up with technology find the human connection building a lot more challenging. So both have their own work cut out for them.
Right. This is brilliant. Brilliant. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm sure these nuggets of wisdom are going to be very, very useful. So thank you so much again for participating in this series. And what I'll do is after this, I'll definitely share the transcript with you before we go live. Thank you once again for taking the time, Abhijit.
My pleasure, Aniso. And I think that, the nuggets of wisdom, as far as I was concerned, was the way you were summarizing something so crispy. That's a nugget. Mine was just like,
Oh,
So I think I would sort of really be very grateful to you to, for giving me a chance to share my ideas on this. Thank you so very much. Much appreciated. Good luck for your book.
all right. Thank you so much. Take care.